In the shadows of Florence during the Renaissance, when power, wealth, and ambition defined the future of Europe, a secret force operated. History commonly recalls the Medici men, bankers, dukes, and popes, but behind them loomed extraordinary women whose impact was equally deep, if not deeper. They were strategists, patrons, survivors, and dreamers who operated within a world that attempted to restrict them to silence. Far from subservient wives or mere figures for adornment, these women forged alliances through suitable marriages, directed the politics of courts, maintained dynasties during crises, and left cultural achievements which continue to resonate today. From Catherine de Medici's command of diplomacy in a perilous France to Eleonora di Toledo's economic authority in Florence, and from the great artistic commissions of Maria de Medici to the sponsorship of scientific research by Christina of Lorraine, their tales uncover a facet of history too commonly buried beneath myth and patriarchal distortion. This is a journey into their world, a world of scandal and betrayal, of survival and resilience, of art and science, of power wielded in unexpected ways. These women were not side characters in the drama of the Renaissance. They were central figures who challenged norms, endured hardships, and left marks that can still be felt in galleries, palaces, and even in the way we understand female agency today. By unveiling their lives, we uncover not only forgotten stories, but also timeless lessons about resilience, influence, and the many ways power can be exercised. Hello everyone, welcome to our channel, Words of Time, and today, through this video, we journey into the lives of the Medici women, lifting the curtain over the untold narrative of their power, rivalry, and lasting legacy. Their world as Medici women was perilous, the options limited, but the impact huge. Florence during the Renaissance has long been defined through the narratives of men whose names became synonymous with political manipulation, artistic genius, and economic authority. The well-known narratives of the Medici men, of the merchants as princes, and of the artists as they embedded the city for eternity in marble and paint have defined the period for us. But behind these narratives, frequently lost in the margins, stood women whose lives were more than mere passive wives or decorative consorts. The truth is many of these women not only existed, but were indispensable in the cultural, political, and intellectual lives of their cities. Their voices may not have been as well documented as those of men, but when one tracks the evidence as it exists, a portrait takes form of women as strategists, patrons, mediators, and even in a few instances, determining rulers but not in name. First of all, one must grasp the reality that Renaissance Florence was as much a place of potential as it was of peril for women of ambition. The city was organized around family alliance networks, and marriages were not merely domestic, but power-based alliances which would decide the balance of power between families vying for dominance. A woman's place in such a society would frequently involve her fortune and aspirations with those of her family, not as a result of a lack of choice, but as part of a dynamic wherein she would learn how to operate from these premises as a means of exercising power in a less than overt manner. We glimpse this action from them through letters, dowry agreements, and reports from foreign ambassadors which give us a glimpse into their lives as not at all passive figures. One of the clearest examples of women shaping Florence comes from the Medici family itself. While Cosimo de' Medici is remembered as the patriarch who consolidated wealth and influence, the women of his family were crucial in forging the alliances that sustained his dynasty. His wife, Contessina de' Bardi, came from a once powerful noble family whose name and connections added legitimacy to the Medici, who were at that time still seen as new money. Contessina's role was not confined to providing children or managing the household. She became an anchor for the family during periods when Cosimo was exiled or under political attack. Reports suggest that she managed finances, negotiated with allies, and kept the family network functioning while her husband could not act openly. In a city where political winds could change suddenly, such quiet but steady management was essential for survival. The daughters of powerful families were no less important. Their marriages were carefully chosen to secure bonds with other influential clans, but once married, they did not always fade into the background. Many of them became key intermediaries, using their connections to influence decisions, secure positions for their relatives, and even steer diplomatic exchanges. For example, when daughters of Florence married into foreign courts, they acted as cultural bridges, introducing Florentine tastes, ideas, and contacts to new settings. This was not simply a matter of fashion. It was political work that helped Florence secure allies across Europe. Another vivid example comes from Lucrezia Tornabuoni, Piero de Medici's wife and mother of Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lucrezia was by no means a passive wife. She was a poet, religious patron, and active administrator of the family's immense properties. Her poems demonstrate an intellect concerned with theological and moral issues, her letters her calm hand at business and diplomacy. When her husband's health fared poorly, she became the support of the family, seeing the Medici interests safeguarded and her sons well-trained for rulership. Lorenzo himself, one of the best-known men of the Renaissance, frequently took his mother's counsel on personal as well as political matters, a strong sign of the deference she inspired. In looking at the lives of women such as Lucrezia, it becomes evident that women's power usually worked in what would be termed the unofficial realm. They were not usually granted formal titles or offices, but they had power within the realm of intersection between family, politics, and culture. They had power by means of letters, by patronage, by administration of the household, and by the power of eloquence. These were not small roles. In a world whereby alliances could cause the fortunes of a family to rise or fall, the power to garner confidence, ensure loyalty, and form opinion was as great as the power of commanding the military. Florence during the Renaissance was also a city of letters, and women participated in this intellectual culture. Some wrote poetry, others engaged in philosophical debates, and still others used their writings to instruct or inspire their children. The act of writing was itself a statement of presence, a way of leaving a trace in a world that often sought to overlook them. Through these writings, we see how women grappled with questions of faith, morality, and politics, and how they viewed their place in society. Far from being silent, they were active voices in shaping the moral and cultural fabric of their city. It is also worth noting that women's patronage of the arts played a role in shaping Renaissance culture. While the names of male patrons dominate the historical record, women too commissioned works, supported artists, and influenced artistic taste. Churches, convents, and charitable institutions often benefited from the gifts of wealthy women, who sought to leave a mark not only in their lifetimes, but also in the memory of the community. These acts of patronage were not only expressions of faith, but also declarations of status and influence. By endowing a chapel or commissioning a painting, a woman could secure a legacy for her family and assert her role in the cultural life of Florence. The dangers that women faced in this world were real. The stakes of political life were high, and failure could mean exile, financial ruin, or even assassination for entire families. Women, too, suffered the consequences of these shifts, but they also learned to navigate them. Some used their ability to mediate, presenting themselves as peacemakers in times of conflict. Others acted as protectors of family members when political storms broke out. The expectation that women should embody patience, loyalty, and resilience could become, in their hands, a source of strength that allowed them to act when others could not. Beyond the Medici, there were many other women in Florence who shaped their world in ways large and small. Noble women, merchants' wives, and even nuns in convents all participated in the life of the city. Convents, in particular, became spaces where women could exercise intellectual and spiritual leadership. Some convents were centers of learning, where women composed music, wrote texts, and engaged in correspondence with leading figures of the time. The walls of the cloister did not silence them, but rather provided a stage for a different kind of authority. What becomes clear when we look closely is that the story of Florence cannot be told solely through its male figures. The women of the city were not passive bystanders, but active participants who shaped politics, culture, and family life. They were strategists who managed households that were political entities in themselves. They were patrons who directed wealth toward causes that reinforced their influence. They were writers who left behind words that reveal minds fully engaged with the issues of their time. They were mediators who helped sustain alliances and protect their families in times of crisis. To reduce them to the role of mere wives or consorts is to miss the complexity of their lives and the depth of their contributions. Their work was often unrecognized because it took place in forms that did not fit the official records of power, but it was no less essential. The Renaissance, often celebrated as a time of rebirth and innovation, was also a time when women found ways to assert themselves in a world that did not easily make space for them. By looking beyond the familiar male-centered narratives, we uncover a richer, more nuanced picture of Florence, one in which women were indeed pulling the strings and shaping the destiny of their city. This understanding challenges the myth of passivity that has long surrounded Renaissance women. It allows us to see them not as background figures, but as central actors whose contributions deserve recognition. When we unveil the matriarchs, we discover that Florence in the Renaissance was not only the city of Lorenzo and Cosimo, of Machiavelli and Michelangelo, but also the city of Contessina, Lucrezia, and countless others whose names may not have survived, but whose actions shaped the course of history. The Renaissance was a stage where opportunity and danger walked side by side, and for women, this was perhaps truer than for anyone else. To survive and thrive, they needed intelligence, resilience, and vision. Many of them displayed these qualities in abundance, leaving us with a legacy that invites us to rethink our understanding of power, influence, and the making of history itself. The role of women in Renaissance Florence and beyond becomes even more fascinating when we look at how many of them operated not only in the open, but also in the shadows. Much of their influence was subtle, disguised in gestures of loyalty or piety, yet beneath the surface, their actions could shift the balance of power across families, cities, and even kingdoms. Marriage, in particular, was not a simple domestic arrangement. It was a calculated move in a much larger chess game where alliances were made, rivalries softened, and fortunes secured. A bride carried more than her dowry into her husband's house. She carried the reputation, connections, and sometimes even the political leverage of her entire family. This meant that a clever woman could find ways to transform what looked like submission into authority and what appeared as duty into opportunity. Florentine families understood that a marriage contract was not only about securing heirs, but also about building bridges with rivals or strengthening ties with partners. A young woman, once married, became both an ambassador and a gatekeeper. On one side, she was expected to uphold her husband's interests, but on the other, she remained a trusted confidant of her natal family. The tension between these loyalties could be dangerous, but it could also be productive. A wife could whisper into her husband's ear, persuading him to lean toward a course of action that favored her brothers or uncles. She could also carry sensitive information between households, a role that gave her significant leverage. Because of the expectation that women were apolitical, their movements and letters sometimes attracted less suspicion, making them natural messengers or intermediaries. This is where the image of women as strategists and spies becomes especially compelling. Florence was filled with plots, betrayals, and sudden reversals of fortune. Men were constantly watched, their alliances tested, their words recorded. But a woman, operating quietly within her domestic role, could influence a conversation at the dinner table, pass a note under the guise of correspondence with family, or host gatherings where alliances were explored in coded language. This does not mean that every Florentine woman engaged in espionage, but for those tied to the great families, such skills could be the difference between survival and destruction. Among the most famous examples of such political maneuvering stands Catherine de Medici, whose reputation has long been shaped by myths of poison and black magic. Born into the powerful but often embattled Medici family, she carried the legacy of Florence into the heart of French politics when she married Henry, the son of Francis I of France. At first, her position seemed precarious. She was young, far from home, and her husband's affections lay with his mistress, Diane de Poitiers. Yet Catherine possessed an extraordinary ability to endure, observe, and wait for her moment. When her husband eventually ascended the throne as Henry II, she remained overshadowed by Diane, but upon his sudden death, Catherine assumed a central role as queen mother to her young sons. It was during these years that Catherine's reputation as the Black Queen took shape. Faced with a kingdom torn by religious wars between Catholics and Protestants, she had to navigate a minefield of factional rivalries. To maintain the fragile unity of France and protect the throne for her children, she relied on intelligence networks, careful marriages, and at times ruthless measures. Her detractors accused her of employing poisoners, astrologers, and spies, painting her as a sinister manipulator. While much of this was exaggerated by enemies seeking to discredit her, there is no doubt that she mastered the art of covert influence. She arranged marriages to pacify hostile factions, used feasts and entertainments as venues for secret negotiations, and built a circle of informants who kept her aware of plots against the crown. The legend of poison plots, though often more rumor than fact, reveals how deeply her contemporaries recognized her skill at controlling events from behind the scenes. Catherine's influence was not simply destructive. She was also a great patron of the arts, commissioning works that helped shape the French Renaissance. She sponsored architects, painters, and dramatists, leaving a cultural legacy that extended far beyond the intrigues of the court. Yet her political reputation often overshadowed these contributions, leading her to be remembered primarily as a dark figure rather than as a pragmatic strategist in a violent and unstable age. What her life reveals most clearly is that women, even in foreign courts, could transform their marital role into a platform for power. In Florence itself, another woman, Lucrezia Tornabuoni, exemplifies a different side of female strategy, one less associated with espionage and more with the art of connection and cultural patronage. As the wife of Piero de Medici and the mother of Lorenzo the Magnificent, Lucrezia held a position at the very center of Florentine life. Yet her influence extended beyond her household. She was a writer, producing religious poetry that reflected both her intellect and her piety. More importantly, she was a builder of networks, using her correspondence, patronage, and personal relationships to weave together alliances that strengthened the Medici family's position. Lucrezia's letters reveal a woman deeply engaged with the affairs of her time. She arranged marriages for her children and relatives, negotiated dowries, and maintained friendships across the political spectrum. Unlike Catherine de Medici, she did not rule from a throne, but her ability to connect people and secure loyalty was no less significant. She supported convents and charitable institutions, endearing the Medici name to both elites and ordinary citizens. She also acted as a patron of writers and artists, nurturing a cultural environment that helped make Florence the epicenter of Renaissance creativity. Her influence was subtle, but it was far-reaching, shaping both the private and public face of her family. What is striking when we compare Catherine and Lucrezia is how both demonstrate the range of strategies available to women. Catherine's life shows how a woman could wield power directly in the turbulent world of dynastic politics, while Lucrezia illustrates how influence could be cultivated through culture, charity, and careful relationship building. Both relied on the institution of marriage as their entry point into power, but both transcended the role of mere consort by turning their positions into platforms for action. These examples highlight how Renaissance women leveraged the very structures that were meant to limit them. Marriage was supposed to confine them to the roles of wives and mothers, yet in practice it placed them at the crossroads of political and social networks. Their dowries gave them economic weight, their family ties gave them political significance, and their personal talents allowed them to transform these resources into real influence. Whether through overt political maneuvering, as in the case of Catherine, or through cultural patronage, as with Lucrezia, these women demonstrate that the Renaissance was as much shaped by female strategists as by the men whose names dominate the chronicles. At the heart of this story lies the recognition that covert influence was not a marginal phenomenon, but an essential part of Renaissance politics. Spies, informants, and secret alliances were the lifeblood of Florentine power struggles, and women often played critical roles in these networks. They could gather intelligence from conversations that men might not take seriously, transmit messages under the guise of family correspondence, or use their domestic spaces as venues for discreet meetings. Even the act of arranging a marriage could serve as a form of espionage, since a bride often brought with her knowledge of her family's intentions and vulnerabilities. This covert dimension of women's influence reveals both their ingenuity and their precarious position. They had to operate in ways that did not draw too much attention, since open assertion of political ambition by a woman could provoke backlash. Yet by mastering the arts of subtlety, persuasion, and quiet maneuvering, they carved out spaces of authority that were often more enduring than the noisy displays of power by their male counterparts. Their work was not always visible, but it was woven into the very fabric of Renaissance politics, ensuring that the story of Florence and Europe in this era cannot be told without them. These patterns also raise questions about how we define power itself. If we only look for formal offices, official decrees, or military commands, women will always appear absent. But if we recognize influence as the ability to shape decisions, guide alliances, and direct cultural life, then their presence becomes undeniable. The strategists and spies of Florence remind us that power often works through channels that escape the official record. It whispers in letters, moves through marriages, and finds expression in acts of patronage and persuasion. By tracing these hidden paths, we uncover a history where women were not only companions to powerful men, but actors in their own right. They were the silent architects of alliances, the quiet observers who gathered intelligence, the steady voices who guided sons and husbands, and the cultural patrons who ensured that Florence's brilliance would echo across centuries. In unveiling these matriarchs, we see not only their courage and intelligence, but also the enduring truth that influence takes many forms, some of which are so deeply woven into everyday life that they are easy to miss unless we look carefully. The story of Florence during the Renaissance continues to unfold as one filled with brilliance, intrigue, and hidden hands shaping its destiny. Women, as already shown through the examples of Contessina, Lucrezia, and Catherine, were never passive figures, but often central to the delicate balance of power. If the previous chapters of this history reveal the strategists and spies who operated within domestic and political structures, the next chapter shows how the same stage of Renaissance Florence demanded that women learn to navigate scandal, betrayal, and survival. The Medici family, whose name became nearly synonymous with the fate of Florence itself, produced not only powerful men, but also remarkable women who bore the heavy price of their positions. Their lives remind us that power was never free of danger, and survival in a court as volatile as Florence's required a blend of intelligence, wealth, and at times sheer resilience. Eleonora di Toledo is one of the most striking examples of a woman whose presence transformed the Florentine court. She was born into the powerful Spanish family of the Viceroy of Naples and married Cosimo, the first de Medici in the middle of the 16th century, cementing an alliance that strengthened the Medici position in Italy. More than a decorative consort, Eleonora brought immense wealth into the marriage, wealth that became the foundation for the Medici's consolidation of ducal authority. Her dowry alone provided Cosimo with resources that allowed him to stabilize Florence's finances, support military campaigns, and embark on architectural projects that displayed Medici grandeur. The Spanish Duchess, as she was often called, was not merely a silent benefactor. She actively participated in estate management, supervising lands, mines, and agricultural production, and she developed a reputation as an able administrator. Eleonora's influence extended beyond economics into politics and representation. She frequently acted as regent when Cosimo was absent, presiding over matters of governance with competence that impressed even her critics. Yet her foreign origin and immense wealth also made her a target of suspicion. Some Florentines resented her Spanish identity, seeing her as a symbol of foreign dominance, while others whispered that her wealth gave her undue influence over her husband. Even so, she built a lasting legacy through her patronage of religious institutions, most famously financing the construction of the Church of Santo Spirito and the Chapel of the Princes, monuments that tied her name to Florence's spiritual and cultural identity. Eleonora's ability to transform her dowry into political capital shows how women in the Renaissance, often confined by marriage contracts, could reframe their assigned roles into genuine platforms of authority. If Eleonora represents wealth turned into power, Bianca Capello reveals the ways scandal itself could become both weapon and curse. Born in Venice into a noble family, Bianca's life took a dramatic turn when, as a young woman, she fled her family to elope with a Florentine clerk. This act of defiance against her family's authority and Venetian expectations already branded her as scandalous. Yet her fate became far more entangled with Medici politics when she captured the heart of Francesco de Medici, heir to the ducal throne. Their relationship was controversial from the start. Francesco was married, and Bianca's arrival at the Florentine court set tongues wagging. The scandal deepened when, after the death of Francesco's wife, Bianca became his official consort. Her Venetian origins, her reputation as a woman who had defied convention, and her sudden rise from outsider to Duchess of Florence made her a lightning rod for criticism. Rumors swirled about her ambition, her influence over Francesco, and her alleged role in manipulating court affairs for her own gain. At the same time, her beauty and charisma made her impossible to ignore. She survived more than one assassination attempt, testimony both to the dangers she faced and to her ability to endure in a hostile environment. The hostility came not only from political rivals, but also from members of the Medici family itself, who regarded her as an interloper. Bianca's life ended tragically when she and Francesco died within hours of each other, leading to speculation of poisoning. Whether true or not, the mystery surrounding her death only added to her reputation as one of the most scandalous and resilient women in Medici history. The lives of Eleonora and Bianca highlight the precarious position of women in power. Their influence was undeniable, but it carried with it constant risk. Wealth, beauty, and intelligence could all be turned against them, transformed into sources of suspicion or envy. Eleonora's immense dowry made her indispensable, but also provoked whispers of domination. Bianca's charm and determination won her a place beside Francesco, but also marked her as a dangerous outsider. Both women illustrate the price of power in Renaissance Florence. The more a woman stepped into the realm of influence, the more she exposed herself to betrayal, scandal, and even mortal peril. This was not unique to them. Many Medici women endured personal sacrifices in exchange for the power and prestige of their positions. Marriages arranged for political advantage often brought them into hostile or loveless unions. Their lives were shaped by the constant tension between duty to their natal family and loyalty to their new household. In some cases, their survival depended on their ability to navigate this dual allegiance with tact and intelligence. In others, they paid the ultimate price when factional conflicts erupted. The court of Florence was a dangerous arena, and the women who occupied its highest places walked a narrow line between respect and ruin. The sacrifices demanded by power extended beyond personal happiness into the realm of family. Daughters were often pawns in the Medici strategy of alliance building, married off to foreign princes or dukes to secure political bonds. Once transplanted into foreign courts, they carried the burden of representing both their new family and their Medici bloodline. Some, like Catherine de Medici in France, turned this burden into an opportunity for influence. Others found themselves isolated, navigating courts that viewed them with suspicion and sometimes outright hostility. Their letters often reveal longing for Florence, expressions of homesickness, and the struggle to adapt to new environments. Betrayal was also an ever-present danger. The Medici family itself was prone to internal divisions, and women often found themselves caught in the crossfire. A sister married into one faction could find herself opposing the interests of a brother or cousin allied with another. The same marriage that once promised security could become a source of vulnerability if political tides shifted. Allegiances could change overnight, leaving women exposed to accusations or reprisals. In some cases, women's very survival depended on their ability to appear loyal to both sides without fully committing to either, a skillful dance of diplomacy that demanded both intelligence and emotional strength. The tragic fates of some Medici women underscore the risks of this precarious existence. The deaths of Bianca Capello and Francesco de Medici under mysterious circumstances are emblematic of how quickly fortune could turn. In other cases, women endured long years of exile or isolation after the fall of their families. Even when they escaped physical harm, the constant scrutiny, rumor, and judgment could exact a heavy emotional toll. The very qualities that enabled them to rise, beauty, wealth, charm, intellect, could just as easily become weapons used against them. Yet it would be a mistake to view these women only as victims. Their survival, often against extraordinary odds, speaks to their resilience. Eleonora di Toledo not only brought stability to Cosimo's reign, but also left an enduring mark on Florence's cultural and spiritual landscape. Bianca Capello, despite the scandal that surrounded her, proved capable of holding her place in one of the most hostile courts in Europe. Their lives remind us that women in Renaissance Florence were not passive ornaments, but active players in a high-stakes game. They endured betrayal, navigated scandal, and bore the sacrifices that came with power, all while leaving behind legacies that continue to shape how we understand this period. The thread that connects them to figures like Lucrezia Tornabuoni and Catherine de Medici is clear. All of them operated in a world where the official structures of power were dominated by men, yet they found ways to carve out authority within and around those structures. Some did so through wealth, others through culture, others still through the dangerous arts of intrigue and survival. Together, they show that the history of the Renaissance is incomplete without their stories. The brilliance of Florence was built not only by bankers, artists, and politicians, but also by the women who stood at their sides, behind them, and sometimes in front of them, facing risks that few men fully understood. The price of power for these women was steep, but their willingness to pay it, and their ability to turn sacrifice into influence, ensures that their names endure. Their stories remind us that survival itself can be a form of triumph, and that in a city where betrayal was common and scandal inevitable, the ability to navigate danger was as much a mark of greatness as the ability to commission a masterpiece or command an army. Florence's matriarchs reveal to us the human cost of power, the resilience required to hold it, and the enduring impact of those who refused to be silenced by the expectations of their age. The story of Florence's women in the Renaissance, and of those tied to the Medici bloodline and its legacy, flows naturally from the intrigues of courts, the sacrifices endured for power, and the resilience shown in navigating scandal into another profound arena where their influence continues to resonate, the realm of cultural and artistic patronage. If Eleonora di Toledo and Bianca Capello remind us of the human cost of political survival, figures like Maria de Medici and Christina of Lorraine reveal how women extended their influence beyond the constraints of dynastic politics and into the shaping of art, science, and culture across Europe. What makes this legacy extraordinary is not simply the wealth these women controlled, but the ways they directed it, turning fortune into creative flourishing, political instability into patronage that preserved genius, and personal position into cultural leadership that continues to echo today. Maria de Medici offers one of the clearest examples of a woman whose reach in the artistic world transformed taste and trends across the continent. Born into the Medici family and later married to Henry IV of France, Maria inherited not only immense wealth, but also the tradition of patronage that her family had cultivated for generations in Florence. In France, she used her resources and authority to commission works that elevated both her personal legacy and the grandeur of the French monarchy. Perhaps most famously, she employed Peter Paul Rubens, the Flemish painter whose artistry captured the drama, vitality, and elegance that came to define Baroque painting. The cycle of paintings Rubens produced for Maria, known as the Marie de Medici cycle, remains one of the most ambitious series ever commissioned by a queen. This was not a casual act of decoration. Through art, Maria sought to solidify her authority and rewrite narratives about her rule, which had often been contested due to factional rivalries and her foreign origins. The paintings portrayed her as divinely ordained, her marriage as a sacred union, her regency as a period of stability, and her role as Queen Mother as a pillar of continuity. In other words, Maria used art as propaganda, yet at the same time, she contributed to the flourishing of European art by enabling one of its great masters to produce work of enduring importance. Her patronage helped solidify Rubens' reputation, while also shaping the visual language through which queenship and authority were represented in the 17th century. Maria's cultural impact did not stop at painting. She amassed a significant collection of sculptures, tapestries, and jewels, leaving behind a treasury that spoke to both her aesthetic sensibilities and her political ambitions. Collections of such scale did not remain private pleasures. They set standards for courts across Europe, influencing how monarchies displayed wealth and power. Through her patronage, Maria ensured that the Medici tradition of shaping culture did not remain confined to Florence, but extended into the very heart of France and radiated outward across the continent. While Maria's legacy in the arts was monumental, Christina of Lorraine reveals a different dimension of female influence: the fostering of intellectual life, particularly in the sciences. Christina married Ferdinand I de Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, bringing her French lineage into one of Italy's most powerful courts. While her position placed her within the expected duties of a duchess, Christina went further by nurturing scientific inquiry at a time when the boundaries of knowledge were being tested in ways that could provoke both admiration and condemnation. She became a key supporter of Galileo Galilei in the early stages of his career, offering protection and legitimacy when his ideas about the cosmos challenged traditional views. Her role in Galileo's rise cannot be overstated. Patronage in the Renaissance and Baroque worlds was not only about funding, but about shielding scholars from political and religious censure. A thinker like Galileo needed allies in high places to present his findings without being crushed by the weight of orthodoxy. Christina's support, expressed through conversations, court connections, and the atmosphere of intellectual openness she fostered, allowed him to articulate ideas that would revolutionize science. Her presence in his correspondence reveals a woman engaged not merely as a symbolic patron, but as an active participant in dialogue, asking questions, probing ideas, and grappling with the implications of his theories. Christina's interest in science did not exist in isolation from other cultural pursuits. Like many Medici women, she supported the arts, music, and architecture, helping to sustain Florence's role as a cultural capital. But it is her involvement in science that distinguishes her, showing how women could engage directly with the intellectual currents of their age. At a time when women were often excluded from universities and academies, Christina carved out a space where her curiosity and influence could matter. By extending patronage into realms traditionally reserved for men, she not only aided Galileo but also broadened the scope of what women could contribute to. Taken together, the legacies of Maria de Medici and Christina of Lorraine underscore the breadth of Medici women's influence. One shaped the trajectory of European art, commissioning masterpieces that redefined how power could be represented on canvas. The other lent crucial support to scientific advancement, enabling ideas that would forever alter humanity's understanding of the universe. Both operated within the structures of their marriages and dynasties, yet both transcended those confines by directing resources toward creative and intellectual pursuits that outlived the political intrigues of their times. The broader picture that emerges from these examples is of women who, even while navigating the dangers of court life and the constraints of patriarchal expectations, used patronage as a form of agency. Patronage was not passive spending, it was a conscious act of shaping culture. By deciding which artists to commission, which scientists to support, and which institutions to endow, these women determined what would be remembered, celebrated, and developed. They left marks not only on their immediate environments, but also on the broader course of European history. The enduring impact of their choices can still be felt today. Maria de Medici's Rubens cycle remains a cornerstone of Baroque art, studied for both its artistic brilliance and its political symbolism. Christina of Lorraine's support for Galileo stands as a reminder that the advancement of science required not only genius, but also courage and patronage. Their investments in architecture, music, and intellectual life helped create the conditions in which later generations could continue to innovate. When we walk through Florence, Paris, or any number of European cities today, we see traces of their influence in the buildings, the collections, and even in the scientific legacies that define modern thought. What connects them back to figures like Eleonora di Toledo and Bianca Capello is the constant thread of resilience and vision. These women did not accept the limited roles prescribed to them. They redefined what it meant to be a duchess, a queen, or a matriarch, turning wealth and position into tools for enduring change. Some faced scandal and betrayal, others navigated suspicion or hostility, but all left behind more than personal stories of survival. They left legacies of culture, intellect, and beauty that continue to shape the way we understand the Renaissance and its aftermath. Their example also invites us to reconsider how we define power. Political authority may shift from one hand to another, but cultural influence has a way of outlasting immediate struggles. By choosing to support artists, writers, and scientists, women like Maria and Christina secured a form of immortality. Their names remain linked to works of art and discoveries that continue to inspire. In this sense, their legacy is not only one of endurance, but also one of triumph, proving that even in a world stacked against them, they could shape history on their own terms. Florence, often celebrated for its male geniuses, its Michelangelos, Leonardos, and Machiavellis, was also sustained and transformed by women whose patronage allowed those geniuses and their successors to flourish. The Medici men may have commanded armies or passed laws, but the Medici women nurtured the soil in which creativity and inquiry took root. Without them, the brilliance of the Renaissance would have been dimmer, and the trajectory of European art and science might have taken a different course. As we trace the path from Lucrezia Tornabuoni's literary patronage to Eleonora's architectural endowments, from Bianca Capello's survival amid scandal to Maria de Medici's monumental commissions and Christina of Lorraine's intellectual patronage, we see a continuum of female influence that is as varied as it is profound. These women remind us that history is not only made on battlefields or in council chambers. It is also made in salons where ideas are exchanged, in chapels adorned with art that stirs devotion, in libraries enriched by books, and in scientific debates nurtured by protection from powerful patrons. To look at their contributions is to see the Renaissance and its aftermath in fuller light, recognizing the hands that quietly but decisively shaped its outcomes. Their investments were not fleeting. They built institutions, collections, and intellectual traditions that endured. In doing so, they ensured that their presence would not vanish with their lifetimes, but would continue to resonate across centuries. The matriarchs of Florence and beyond prove that power, when wielded with vision, can transcend the limits of gender, circumstance, and time, leaving marks that define not only their own era, but also the course of history itself. The enduring legacy of the women of the Medici family and their contemporaries in Renaissance Florence is not only a matter of tracing art collections, political intrigues, or the survival of dynastic fortunes. It is also a question of how we tell history itself. For centuries, the narratives that shaped our understanding of Florence and of the Renaissance more broadly were filtered through patriarchal interpretations that prioritized the deeds of men, princes, generals, bankers, and artists, while leaving women as decorative shadows on the margins. These interpretations often framed women as passive consorts, obedient wives, or tragic victims. When women like Catherine de Medici, Bianca Capello, or Maria de Medici broke through those boundaries, they were often recast in exaggerated stereotypes: witches, poisoners, seductresses, or foreign usurpers. The recovery of their real stories demands a deliberate effort to peel away centuries of myth and bias, reclaiming their place in history not as exceptions or curiosities, but as essential actors in shaping culture, politics, and society. The patriarchal lens has long distorted our view of female agency. For example, Catherine de Medici's pragmatic strategies in an age of religious wars became hostile accounts a web of sinister plots and black magic. Bianca Capello's survival in a court hostile to her very presence was reframed as ambition fueled by scandal. Even the immense cultural investments of Maria de Medici were overshadowed by accusations of extravagance and mismanagement. These women were judged not on the balance of their achievements, but often on their refusal to conform to prescribed ideals of quiet obedience. To reclaim their narratives is to re-examine sources critically, asking who wrote them, for what purpose, and with what biases. When we look at their letters, their patronage, their networks, and their legacies with fresh eyes, we see not caricatures but complex individuals whose lives expand our understanding of what power and resilience could look like in their time. What these women teach us about power is not that it must be tied to military force or public office, but that it can also be expressed through influence, persuasion, patronage, and survival. Power for Medici women was often woven into relationships, marriages, and the circulation of resources. Eleonora di Toledo's ability to translate her dowry into the economic stability of Florence, Lucrezia Tornabuoni's role as a cultural patron and political advisor, or Christina of Lorraine's protection of scientific inquiry, all reveal power exercised in ways that fall outside traditional definitions but were no less real. In their hands, power was adaptive, subtle, and often covert. It did not rely on open confrontation but on patience, strategic alliances, and the careful navigation of hostile environments. Resilience emerges as another central lesson. These women faced circumstances that could have easily broken them: suspicion of foreign origins, scandals that threatened their reputations, betrayals within their own families, and the constant risk of political downfall. Yet they endured, and in enduring, they carved spaces for themselves where none had been intended. Their resilience was not only personal but institutional, ensuring the survival and flourishing of families, courts, and cultural legacies. Eleonora di Toledo's regency during her husband's absence demonstrated resilience that stabilized governance. Bianca Capello's very survival after assassination attempts spoke to a determination that defied her enemies. Catherine de Medici's ability to maintain the French crown through decades of religious conflict showed resilience on a scale that shaped European history. Female agency in their stories takes many forms, and this variety itself is a lesson. Agency does not always mean visible leadership. It can mean creating networks of influence, acting as mediators, or shaping culture through patronage. Maria de Medici demonstrated agency by using art to control narratives about her reign, Christina of Lorraine by providing Galileo with the support he needed to publish his ideas. Lucrezia Tornabuoni showed agency through writing and family strategy, while Isabella de Medici, often remembered for her wit and charisma, exercised it through defiance of restrictive gender roles. Each of these examples underscores the point that agency is not a single template, but a spectrum of strategies suited to circumstance. The relevance of these lessons extends far beyond the Renaissance. In any era, women's power has often been framed as secondary or hidden, yet the Medici women demonstrate that influence exercised outside the spotlight can shape outcomes as decisively as formal authority. Their stories remind us that agency is not always about changing the entire system, but sometimes about bending its rules, finding cracks through which to maneuver, and preserving the possibility of action even when choices are constrained. For women today, and indeed for anyone whose voice has been marginalized, the Medici women stand as examples of how endurance, creativity, and the intelligent use of available tools can produce lasting change. Reclaiming their narratives also opens the door to discovering more forgotten female figures who shaped history. Florence and the Medici dynasty provide vivid examples, but they are only one part of a much larger tapestry. Across Europe, queens, duchesses, merchants' wives, and nuns left imprints on their societies. Isabella d'Este in Mantua used her court as a beacon of artistic and intellectual life, commissioning works and fostering exchanges that defined Renaissance culture. Marguerite de Navarre in France combined political influence with literary talent, producing works that engaged with religious reform and humanist thought. Sophonisba Anguissa, though not a noblewoman but an artist, carved a place for herself in the male-dominated world of painting, earning respect across courts in Italy and Spain. Each of these women demonstrates that the conditions of marginalization did not prevent female creativity and agency. Rather, they challenged women to find unique ways to make themselves heard. In Florence, many studies reveals women who may not have borne ducal titles, but contributed significantly to religious and cultural life. The convent communities, commonly ridiculed as cloistered and passive, were dynamic centers of art and learning. The nuns commissioned music, illuminated manuscripts, and corresponded with the lay elite. Their authority may have been religious rather than political, but it nurtured the same ferment of the Renaissance, which gave us masterpieces of stone and color. These women remind us that power may be diffused through a society, not concentrated at its political center. The labor of unearthing such narratives is a continuing one, and it obliges us to resist the simplistic tales of women as helpless victims or nefarious schemers. The reality is the richness of their lives, the ways they circumvented limitations, took advantage of opportunities, and remade the world around them. By recovering their histories, we deepen the very concept of history itself, making it more inclusive, subtle, and truthful. As the extended journey through Florence and the Medici women draws to a close, what comes into view is how their histories continue to matter not just for what they have to communicate from the past, but what they can also communicate from the present. They matter because they force us to comprehend power differently, because they make us notice resilience in forms hitherto invisible, because they confirm the value of agency in all its multiform guises. They matter because they make us recall that the past always had a multiplicity of voices, many of them silenced or distorted, but real for us if we pay close attention. They matter because they suggest how cultural legacies, art, architecture, science, literature, are not indifferent products but the result of choices, investments, and imaginations, many of them from women who did not desire to continue unnoticeably. To walk through Florence today, to stand before the Rubens cycle in Paris, or to think of the revolution Galileo ignited, is to stand before the legacies of these women. They remind us that history is not merely what appears between the covers of official chronicles, but what was fostered in letters, private chapels, collections, and councils. Their names, Lucrezia Tornabuoni, Eleonora di Toledo, Bianca Capello, Catherine de Medici, Maria de Medici, Christina of Lorraine, Isabella de Medici, and many others, constitute a constellation of power which sheds a deeper light upon the Renaissance. Their lives call us to continue the quest for the lost, to question the assumptions of earlier historians, and to pay tribute to the active agents of those who created history hidden from view but not the less effective. The history of the Medici women and their contemporaries is not one of footnotes or anomalies. This is a story of commanding importance, without which the Renaissance cannot truly be understood. To recount it is to recognize that history is richer, more nuanced, and more human when women's voices, which suffered scandal, managed betrayal, exercised influence, and created cultural lives that continue to define our world, are included. Their histories matter because they remind us the past need not be fixed but may be recovered, reassessed, and revised, and by doing so, not merely honor them but widen the possibilities of what history may do for us today.